Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Thomas Baylor returned to his century-old family homestead, he didn't expect to find a shiny new sign welcoming him to a place he never joined, Pine Ridge, Private HOA Community. What began as a quiet weekend in the mountains ignited a battle for land, legacy, and the truth. I always knew the land had history in it, not just dates and dusty archives or fading ink on land deeds. Real history. My family had lived on this land since long before Arizona got its statehood tattoo. 112 acres of scrub pine, rock, rattlesnakes, and the old stone house my great-grandfather built with his own hands in 1912, using stones dragged up from the dry wash behind the ridge. That house had stood longer than most of the buildings in downtown Prescott, longer than any HOA. Most weekends, after a week of lecturing my college kids on the Pueblo Revolt or the Gadsden Purchase, I'd load up my truck with tools and supplies and make the drive up the mountain. The Baylor homestead was my sanctuary. Rough, wild, peaceful. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors. Just a man, his land, and the long echo of his bloodline in the wind. I'd just finished replacing the roof on the main house. New shakes, all hand-cut to match the originals, and was planning to spend the weekend working on the root cellar when I saw something that stopped me cold. Just past the bend in the dirt road that winds through the pinon trees and up to my gate, a brand new wooden sign stood proudly in the sun. Welcome to Pine Ridge, Private HOA Community. I killed the engine and stared at it like I was seeing a ghost in broad daylight. It was neatly painted, mounted into the earth with fresh concrete, and planted dead center in what I knew, without question, was my land. At first, I thought someone must have misread a map. Maybe the HOA from one of the housing developments a few miles down the mountain had gotten overly ambitious with signage. A simple mistake, I told myself. I even laughed a little, but the deeper I drove, the less funny it became. The road had been partially regraded, and someone had added reflective corner stakes, the kind county contractors use. There were new metal signposts with street names I didn't recognize. Pine Loop Drive, Larkspur Crossing. I passed a fresh cluster of black metal mailboxes standing on a new gravel turnout. My family name, Baylor, was stamped on one of the boxes, but the box had no lock, no key, no request from me to install one. At the final bend before my gate, a nylon flag was fluttering in the breeze. White background, pine tree logo. The letters PRE printed in forest green. It was staked right into a berm I'd cleared myself last summer with a pickaxe and a bottle of Gatorade. I sat in the truck, engine idling, just breathing through the anger. Then my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Private number." Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Baylor?" A woman's voice. Clipped, polished, like a real estate agent who'd just rehearsed her pitch in the mirror. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Karen Langford, president of Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I believe you're currently visiting a property that may now fall under our jurisdiction. I wanted to reach out to introduce myself and clarify a few details." I frowned. "Ma'am, I think there's been a serious mistake. This property's been in my family for over 100 years. It's private land. Always has been." She chuckled, actually chuckled, like I was a toddler confusing a broom closet for Narnia. "Well, we've been reviewing some historical cadastral maps from 1948, she said. "Turns out your parcel boundaries weren't formally recorded with the county. We've marked the area as provisional community space under our new charter. No worries. This happens more often than you think with legacy tracts." No, it doesn't," I snapped, keeping my voice even. "I have a recorded deed, paid property taxes, original land patent, and a house older than your bylaws. This land is not part of any HOA. Karen was unfazed. "Actually, that's exactly the sort of confusion we're hoping to resolve. We're committed to stewardship, not conflict. Once you review our community guidelines, I'm confident we can find a cooperative arrangement." I wanted to drive my truck straight through their precious sign. Instead, I hung up. I spent the next hour walking the perimeter of my property. They hadn't built anything. Yet. No houses, no fences, no cement pads. But they had certainly moved in symbolically. New trail markers. Some cheap benches facing a dry ravine, like anyone was going to sit and contemplate the absence of water. It was subtle, but it was a stake in the ground, and it wasn't theirs to claim. By nightfall, I had removed their flag and tossed it into the fire pit. The welcome sign I left standing. not out of courtesy, but because I wanted it to be the first thing they saw when they came back. I had a bad feeling this was just the start of something much worse. The following Friday, I drove back up to the homestead with a box of masonry tools, expecting to patch up the east wall of the barn that had lost a few stones during the last freeze, but I didn't get farther than the bottom of the access road. A steel gate had been installed across it, bright silver, brand new, anchored with concrete posts and a keypad lock bolted to the center post. Above it, another sign, Private Road, Access Restricted, Pine Ridge HOA Enforcement. There was no mistaking it now. I stepped out of the truck and walked up to the keypad. No explanation, no contact info, no emergency access. Just a blank display and a steel box that blinked a red light at me like a taunt. My name wasn't listed, no code, nothing. I called the county utility office to report possible vandalism or obstruction. While I waited on hold, I walked the edge of the road and spotted tire tracks. Heavy equipment, maybe a truck with a trailer. Someone had brought this up here intentionally, and not for a picnic. When I finally reached a human voice, I explained who I was and asked why a private entity had been allowed to block a county road. After a pause, the operator said, "Sir, according to our recent update, that road has been listed as part of the Pine Ridge Estate's managed easement." "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "Well, it looks like a subdivision association petitioned to have access management over that road while its legal ownership is in dispute. The paperwork shows temporary stewardship, pending outcome of a land use determination. They submitted a petition for my driveway," I growled. "Is the address you're referring to the Baylor Homestead?" "That's the one." She went quiet for a second. "Oh, I think I've seen your file." That didn't exactly fill me with confidence. I turned the truck around and took the long way around, a 2-mile hike through the ridge on foot. I carried only my camera, a flashlight, and a thermos, planning to document every violation I could find. When I reached the gate from the inside, I confirmed what I feared. The keypad was active, rigged to an automated latch, and the steel posts were sunk deep. But the bigger shock was what I saw at the house. A neon orange tag had been slapped on the front door. Notice of occupancy suspension, HOA enforcement, no trespassing. Below it, in smaller print, use of this structure is temporarily suspended pending determination of parcel status by Pine Ridge. HOA Charter Subcommittee. I stood there in stunned silence. My house, my family's house, tagged like it was an abandoned warehouse. Then I noticed the lights weren't working. I sprinted to the generator out back, thinking maybe something had gone wrong, but the wiring was intact. The line running to the house had been disconnected, professionally, by someone who knew what they were doing. I pulled out my phone and called APS, the power company. After giving them my meter number, I asked when the shutoff had occurred. "Mr. Baylor," the rep said cautiously, "our records show that the service was temporarily suspended on request of the landholder, under the name Pine Ridge HOA Administration." "They're not the landholder," I snapped. "I am." "I understand, but they provided documentation of provisional ownership under a zoning reassessment filing. We're not authorized to override that without a court order." Court order, provisional ownership. Every word made my blood boil. I tried calling Karen directly, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message short and to the point. "You shut off power to a private residence and locked me off my own land. That's criminal. You've got 24 hours to reverse this, or I file a police report and an injunction." I slept that night in the truck because entering my own house now felt like it might get me arrested. I locked the doors and watched the stars through the windshield, rehearsing the conversation I'd be having with the sheriff the next morning. This was no longer symbolic. They'd made it physical, literal. They had claimed control over my home, cut my access, and left my family legacy with a damn eviction sticker on the door. I wasn't going to let this stand. By 8 the next morning, I was in the county records office in Prescott, slumped over a microfilm scanner like it was 1974. My coffee was still hot, but my patience was already ice cold. I had one mission: prove beyond any doubt that this land, every square inch of it, was mine. Not HOAs, not provisionally managed, not in dispute, mine. And that meant digging into the old stuff. The pre-digital, pre-HOA, pre-bureaucratic ego files that actually told the truth. The woman working the archive desk, Roberta, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else that morning, but when I mentioned the Homestead and the Baylor name, she blinked twice and said, "Oh, you're that case." That didn't sit right. She helped me dig out a thick, yellowing folder labeled Parcel 019-0441B, Original Homestead Patent, Yavapai County Archive, 1911. Inside were copies of the original land patent granted to my great-grandfather under the Homestead Act, signed by the Secretary of the Interior, verified by a now-defunct land office, handwritten acreage, ink stamps, and, best of all, a drawn map showing the boundary markers matched exactly to modern GPS coordinates. Every 50 years, a baler had paid the taxes on time, registered changes to the parcel, the barn in 39, the well in 68, the generator line in 95. It was pristine, continuous, uncontested ownership for over a century. I scanned everything and backed it up in 3 places: flash drive, cloud, and printouts. Then I pulled up the last 10 years of property tax assessments and highlighted everyone addressed to Thomas L. Baylor. My name, my address, my payments. I wasn't just going to argue. I was going to crush them with historical fact. Before I left, Roberta leaned in. "You're not the first person they've tried this on," she said quietly. "HOA tactics around here have gotten real aggressive ever since that new charter passed last year." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. My jaw was set like the ridge rock behind my house. From there, I drove straight to my lawyer's office. I'd called ahead, and by noon, I was sitting across from Susan Lerner, a property attorney with a silver braid and a reputation for treating land disputes like courtroom war. She looked through my file like a general reviewing blueprints for a siege. "Well, they really picked the wrong cowboy," she muttered. Within 20 minutes, she had a temporary restraining order drafted and filed electronically to Yavapai County Superior Court, demanding immediate cessation of all enforcement actions by Pine Ridge HOA against the Baylor property, reinstatement of utility services, and removal of physical barriers. But she didn't stop there. "I'm also filing a notice of intent to sue for wrongful interference, fraudulent misrepresentation, and trespass," she said, tapping away at her keyboard. "Plus damages." I liked her already. By that afternoon, she'd arranged for a process server to hand-deliver the TRO to the HOA's listed address, which, it turned out, was a portable trailer parked at the edge of the new development down the hill from my land. Classy. Then, just as I was heading home, Susan got a call. She put it on speaker. "Mr. Baylor?" came Karen's voice, smug and sweet, like a real estate agent selling beachfront property in Kansas. "No," Susan said coolly. "This is his attorney. You're being served today. Any further contact must go through this office." Karen paused. "I think you're being very aggressive about a situation that could have been handled with civility. You posted enforcement notices on a private residence, cut off essential services, and erected a barrier across legal access," Susan replied. "The time for civility was 3 actions ago." Karen scoffed. "We'll let the courts decide." "Excellent," Susan said. "We've already started." Karen hung up. I sat back in the chair, silent, angry, but calm. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't just reacting. I was fighting back, with everything that mattered: documents, law, truth. By sunset, the sheriff's department had verified the TRO and sent a deputy to inspect the gate and my house. They took photos, noted the power shutoff, and issued a warning to HOA enforcement not to set foot on the property again. It wasn't over, but they'd drawn blood. And now, I was coming for theirs. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in Prescott. Susan told me not to expect much, just a formality to validate the restraining order and force HOA's hand to produce documents. I wore a clean button-down and brought copies of every deed, map, and tax bill we'd assembled. Susan naturally came armed with a full litigation binder and an expression that could sour milk. Karen arrived 10 minutes late in a pale blue pantsuit and sunglasses big enough to block sunlight and accountability. She was flanked by a man in an ill-fitting blazer who introduced himself as HOA counsel. He looked like someone who'd spent more time on LinkedIn than in courtrooms. The judge, a lean, no-nonsense woman named Madeline Reese, opened the session by reviewing the injunction. She didn't look amused. "Ms. Langford," she said, "your HOA filed enforcement actions against a property with a continuous land patent and record of tax payment for over 100 years. You've been asked to provide documentation supporting your jurisdiction. Do you have it?" Karen's attorney stood, cleared his throat, and placed a file on the clerk's table. "Yes, Your Honor. Included is a scanned historical zoning map and updated jurisdiction overlay produced by our planning committee. These show that the parcel in question lies within what we have designated as Phase 1 of Pine Ridge Estates. Susan didn't say a word. She just calmly opened her own binder, flipped to a page, and waited. The judge flipped through the HOA's submission. After a minute, her brow furrowed. "This document says it's from 1948, she said. "Yet this topographical feature, a pond, appears here," she pointed, "despite this pond not being dug until the early 1980s, according to the County Water Resources map." The silence was instant. Karen shifted slightly in her seat. Her lawyer blinked like a deer learning what headlights mean. Judge Reese leaned forward. "Counsel, are you telling me this is a document from 1948, with features added 40 years later?" The lawyer stammered something about scanning inconsistencies and updated annotations. Susan rose like a viper uncoiling. "Your Honor, we suspected this. My client compared the historic map to publicly available NASA Landsat imagery from 1980, 1990, and 2000. That pond, built in 1983, there's no version of this map from 1948 that could have included it. Additionally, GIS metadata embedded in the PDF shows it was created in 2021 using ArcGIS Pro. The author tag, a subcontractor named Cliff Landers, brother of a Pine Ridge board member. The judge looked like someone had just farted in church. "You're alleging falsification." "I'm alleging fraud," Susan said flatly, "and I've just submitted a motion requesting forensic review of all HOA submissions to this court." Karen finally spoke up. "Your Honor, this is getting blown out of proportion. Our association's planning committee made a good faith attempt to clarify historical boundaries. The map is just a tool." The judge stared at her. "You placed an enforcement notice on a private residence. You cut utilities to a home. You submitted a fabricated map to justify it. This isn't a planning committee misprint. This is a deliberate overreach, bordering on criminal." I kept my face blank, but inside I wanted to stand and cheer. The judge granted the motion. All HOA documentation was now subject to independent review by a court-appointed GIS expert. Until then, all Pine Ridge claims over my land were suspended. The restraining order remained in full force, and the judge added a clause. If any further interference occurred, HOA board members could face contempt of court charges. Karen didn't even look at me as she left the courtroom, but her lawyer did, and he looked like he was reconsidering his career choices. Susan patted the table once, satisfied. "That was the moment the wheels came off," she said under her breath. Later that afternoon, we received word that the court-ordered investigator had begun subpoenaing internal HOA communications and GIS records, emails, meeting notes, planning drafts. That was when the first real crack appeared. One of the HOA's junior committee members, a guy named Drew who worked in IT, anonymously forwarded us a zip file of internal emails. The subject line read simply, "You'll want to see this." Inside were email threads between Karen and board members discussing strategic annexation, land holdings without recent filings, and how to incorporate contested parcels quietly before Phase 2. One line from Karen stood out like a loaded gun. "We need this locked in before anyone from the Baylor family notices. Get Cliff to modify the old county map, cleanly." I printed it out and stared at it under my desk lamp that night, so that was it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft. Calculated, deliberate, paper-clip theft of a legacy my family had guarded for 4 generations. And now I had proof. The next 3 days felt like something out of a political thriller. One minute I was patching holes in a barn door. The next I was fielding calls from reporters, county officials, and even a guy from the Arizona Attorney General's office. Once the court-appointed GIS expert confirmed the HOA's map had been created within the last 2 years and deliberately altered to look vintage, the investigation kicked into overdrive. Susan and I met with the county land use board on Monday morning. The chair, a wiry man named Alvaro with a smoker's voice and zero tolerance for games, laid it out for us plainly. "There's been a pattern of suspicious land grabs tied to Pine Ridge HOA over the past 18 months, he said. "You're just the first one with the guts and the paper trail to push back." He handed Susan a packet. Inside was a record of internal filings showing that Pine Ridge Estates had attempted to register 6 parcels as abandoned or in-transition properties under a rarely used clause of the county's subdivision development protocol, a loophole. designed for desert ghost towns and collapsed mines, not active tax-paying properties with 1912 stone houses and tomato gardens. Every one of the filings had been signed off by the same official, Frank Dinsmore, the Deputy Director of Land Dispute Resolution. Susan swore softly under her breath. We already knew that name. Dinsmore was the man who'd supposedly approved the HOA's temporary access oversight of my road. Now we had evidence that he'd done it more than once. And always for Pine Ridge. I asked the obvious question. How does a guy like that get away with it? Alvaro just looked at me. Because most people don't fight. That afternoon, we got the rest of the puzzle. Drew, the same anonymous HOA insider who'd leaked us the emails, agreed to meet us. Not in an office or courtroom, but in a cafe in downtown Prescott. He looked young, maybe early 30s, sweat on his upper lip, clearly nervous. "I'm not proud of what I've been part of," he said. "But I didn't sign up to be part of some land racket. I joined the board to help set up trash collection schedules, not steal ranches." He slid a flash drive across the table. On it, PDFs of internal HOA development plans labeled Pine Ridge Phase 2 Expansion, complete with renderings of 25 luxury homes, all drawn over my land. My barn, scheduled for demolition, my house, referred to as existing structure, to be cleared during site preparation. It was already a done deal. The only thing they were waiting on was final clearance from county land reassessment, which of course would have come from Dinsmore. But it went deeper. Another file revealed that Pine Ridge had routed its applications through a shell company called Desert Creek Holdings, LLC, registered in Austin, Texas. That name sounded familiar, and it should have, because the registration showed the managing agent was one Conrad Langford, Karen's brother. Susan leaned back and exhaled slowly. That's your smoking gun. We now had a triangle of collusion. Karen Langford abusing her position as HOA president. Frank Dinsmore using his county seat to manipulate land status. Conrad Langford set to profit from a fraudulent land development scheme. Within 48 hours, we handed everything over to the Yavapai County District Attorney's Office. The case was reassigned to the state level for criminal investigation, and subpoenas were issued for HOA board records, emails, and every application submitted by Desert Creek Holdings. But before the DA could act, someone beat them to it. That Friday, I got a call from a local contractor named Vince Morales. He'd done work for me once, years ago, on the well casing, said he needed to show me something. I met him at the base of the mountain, and he handed me a printed bid proposal he'd been given by a site foreman from, you guessed it, Pine Ridge HOA. It was for grading work on undeveloped lots in Phase 2. Only problem? The date on the proposal was 2 weeks before the HOA ever contacted me. "You were never supposed to find out," Vince said, shaking his head. "They thought you were just a weekend guy, a formality." The whole thing was already in motion. I didn't say anything. Just stood there holding that paper, hands shaking slightly, like I was holding the execution order for my own house. By Saturday, Susan had filed a motion to expand the complaint to include conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted unlawful seizure of private property, and collusion with a government official. Karen's name was now on an official criminal complaint. Dinsmore's too. And I was just getting started. The morning the arrests happened was oddly quiet, the kind of silence you get just before a thunderclap. I was standing on my porch with a mug of coffee watching a hawk circle the far ridge when my phone buzzed. It was Susan. Just 2 words. "Turn on Channel 7. I did. And there she was. Karen Langford, being escorted out of the Pine Ridge HOA office in handcuffs. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer like she'd dressed for a board meeting, but the look on her face was pure venom. Right behind her was a second man in cuffs, Frank Dinsmore, sweating through his collar, head down. Reporters swarmed them. One of them shouted, "Did you fabricate the documents, Mrs. Langford?" She didn't answer. She just stared dead ahead, as if looking through the whole world. By noon, the charges were announced publicly: conspiracy to commit fraud, abuse of official position, forgery of land records, attempted illegal seizure of private property, and wire fraud. Karen was held on no bail pending a pretrial hearing. Dinsmore was charged separately, but the case was now clearly massive. State-level prosecutors, financial forensics experts, even the Department of Interior had sent inquiries. And the cherry on top? the state froze the assets of Desert Creek Holdings, LLC, including a $2.4 million escrow account connected to future Pine Ridge development. That afternoon, I finally returned to my property without being stopped, questioned, or blocked. The fake signs had been removed by court order, the gate torn down, power was restored. Even the no trespassing HOA enforcement stickers were gone, replaced with a taped notice from the sheriff's office. Property under legal protection, do not disturb. I walked through my grandfather's homestead in absolute silence, checking the locks, the fuse box, the roof I'd finished myself. Nothing had been touched. I sat down at the old oak kitchen table, the same one my great-grandfather had built by hand over 100 years ago, and I exhaled like I hadn't in months. But the story wasn't over. That week, a civil suit was filed on my behalf against Pine Ridge HOA. The damages? $1.2 million, including lost access to property, emotional distress, structural impact due to disconnected utilities, legal expenses, interruption of preservation work under historic registry plans. We also filed a motion to permanently dissolve Pine Ridge HOA on the basis of fraud and abuse of power. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. At least 4 other property owners came forward showing similar harassment, 2 of them elderly, 1 with English as a second language, all targeted because of ambiguous old land records. In a closed-door deposition, Drew, the former HOA member who gave us the files, testified that Karen had personally ordered the targeting of low-priority or vulnerable landowners, believing they'd roll over quietly. She'd been doing this for over a year. The judge's tone during the first civil hearing made it clear. The court was not amused. "You targeted legacy land with manufactured claims," she said, "and now you're going to sit through every inch of this case." Karen sat in court with her jaw clenched, wearing the same pearl earrings I remembered from our first HOA welcome meeting months ago. She didn't speak, not a word. But what hit hardest was what happened in the community itself. Once her arrest hit the news, residents of Pine Ridge Estates began calling the county en masse, demanding an audit of their own association dues and board elections. Turns out Karen had been rerouting maintenance contracts through Conrad's side businesses, inflating costs by nearly 30% and pocketing the difference. They weren't just stealing land, they were fleecing their own neighbors. It was like a house of cards folding in on itself. In 1 week, the HOA vice president resigned. 2 board members submitted formal complaints. By Friday, the HOA's management contract had been terminated, and a court-appointed receiver was put in charge of Pine Ridge's affairs until the case concluded. That night, I stood by the front gate, my gate on my land, finally mine again in every sense, and watched as county workers installed a new, hand-carved wooden sign I'd commissioned. It read, "Baylor Homestead, established 1912. Private property, historical legacy site. Not part of any HOA." I slept better that night than I had in years. I thought things would slow down after the arrests. I was wrong. The following week, I was served a subpoena to testify in front of the Arizona State Grand Jury, investigating not just Karen and Pine Ridge HOA, but a statewide land fraud ring. Apparently, my case had cracked open something far bigger. According to investigators, at least 9 other HOAs across Arizona had attempted similar schemes using manipulated historic land records and shell companies. I met with the state attorney assigned to my case, Joanna Stein, a no-nonsense prosecutor who looked like she'd skipped more vacations than I'd taken in a decade. She explained that Karen's operation was part of what they believed was a coordinated attempt to seize under-mapped land near expanding communities. Homesteads, ranches, anything with vague old records was a target. They knew most owners wouldn't fight, she said. But you did. And you kept the receipts. By receipts, she meant everything I'd found. The Homestead Act deed, the property tax records from 1912 onward, the utility payment logs, and even that one surviving black and white photo of my grandfather building the cabin with the ridge in the background. The kind of thing no fake document could reproduce. My testimony took nearly 4 hours. I went through everything, from the moment I saw the new HOA signs to the courtroom discovery of the fraudulent map with the artificial lake. The jury was quiet, focused. I could tell they were seeing a much larger picture. Later that day, Joanna called. The grand jury just issued 12 new indictments, she said, and Karen's facing additional charges. The fallout kept expanding. The Arizona Department of Real Estate suspended the license of Desert Creek Holdings. Karen's personal assets were frozen. The HOA's insurance carrier dropped coverage, citing fraudulent activity and willful criminal acts by leadership. And thanks to my attorney's motion, a temporary injunction was granted that barred Pine Ridge HOA from conducting any further enforcement actions or financial operations until the trial concluded. That meant no dues collection, no maintenance fines, no board meetings, no property claims. They were effectively paralyzed. And yet, the pushback came. One afternoon, I found graffiti sprayed on my cabin fence. HOA traitor, enjoy your ruined neighborhood. And that same week, a neighbor, someone I'd never even spoken to, tried to block the access road with their truck, claiming I'd brought shame to the community. I didn't argue. I called the sheriff's office. 10 minutes later, the truck was towed and the deputy handed the man a citation for obstruction and harassment. I wasn't playing anymore. Meanwhile, the civil trial was building steam. We now had depositions scheduled with 2 former board members, both of whom had turned state's witness. One of them, Drew, delivered the most damning statement yet. Karen told us, and I quote, "Nobody cares about some ancient rock cabin up in the hills. If we get it on paper first, it's ours." The judge allowed it into the record. I saw Karen twitch when it was read aloud in court. We were gaining ground fast. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. A local news outlet ran an expose on the scandal. Front page, full color. There I was on the cover, standing next to my cabin with the headline, "Modern Land Grab: How One Man Stopped a Scheme to Erase Arizona History." Suddenly, I was getting emails from historians, professors, even families who'd lost old ranches under paperwork technicalities. Some offered help. One guy mailed me photocopies of old geological survey maps from the 30s, showing my homestead clearly marked, predating any HOA boundary. It felt like I'd gone from hunted to symbol. Not just someone defending their cabin, but someone fighting to preserve a piece of history against bureaucratic greed. We were almost there. The final hearing was set for 3 weeks out. That day, the court would rule on final ownership of the land, HOA liability and compensation, Karen's full criminal sentencing, and now the whole damn state would be watching. The morning of the final hearing, I sat outside the Yavapai County Courthouse in my truck, watching the clouds roll over the mountains like slow smoke. My hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. The radio was off. For once, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt earned. Inside, the courtroom was packed, not just press, but law students, ranchers, retired judges, even a few professors from the university who'd followed the case. On the far side of the room sat the remnants of Pine Ridge HOA's board, tight-lipped, dressed too neatly, like a bunch of snakes in suits. Karen sat in the front row, flanked by 2 federal marshals. Her orange jumpsuit was mostly hidden under a blazer, as if anyone might forget why she was there. Judge Hendricks entered. The room rose, and then it began. First, the court clerk read the full list of criminal convictions against Karen Langford. Document fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate theft, forgery of public records, illegal use of municipal zoning systems, attempted racketeering. The sentence, 14 years in federal prison, no parole. Restitution to be determined. Karen didn't say a word, just stared forward, lips pressed into a bitter white line. Next came the civil judgment. My lawyer stood with practiced calm, laying out the final damages and demands. Lost utility use, trespassing enforcement costs, legal fees, emotional distress, destruction of historic signage, the forged claim to property value. It added up to a tidy number, $1.2 million. The HOA's defense attorney tried to argue that the board had been misled by Karen, that they were victims too, but the judge wasn't buying it. He looked directly at them and said, "You signed fraudulent documents. You enforced false boundaries. You barricaded a man from his legally registered century-old property and did so under a flag of authority you never had. That is not a misunderstanding. That is organized theft." Judgment, full compensation awarded to Thomas Baylor. HOA operations suspended indefinitely pending restructuring and full audit. I didn't smile. I just nodded. It was never about revenge. It was about proof, and I had it. The final moment came when Judge Hendricks ruled that the Baylor homestead would be granted official historical preservation status under state protection. That meant it could never again be rezoned, seized, or claimed without express consent of the State Historical Office and my family. Outside, the cameras caught me as I walked down the courthouse steps. A reporter shoved a mic in my face, asking how I felt. "I feel like I just punched 100 years of history back into place," I said. A week later, I stood at the front gate of the Homestead with a cold beer in my hand and a brand new sign bolted to the post. Baylor Homestead, established 1912. We remember our history. You remember your sentence. And that was it. The power lines had been reconnected, the fence repaired, the road reopened. I still find mail addressed to Pine Ridge HOA in my box sometimes. I just write "return to sender" in thick black ink and toss it back. Sometimes, at dusk, I walk out behind the cabin where my great-grandfather used to stand and look out over the valley. The trees haven't changed much. The sky definitely hasn't. But everything else, the fight, the people, the law, has shifted. And now, so has the legacy. This homestead isn't just a memory anymore. It's a warning, carved in stone and court transcripts. You don't steal from the dead. You don't lie to the living. And you sure as hell don't put your fake flag on my family's land.